This record will be deleted. The Mechanicus does not permit servitors to speak. I know this with the certainty of machine logic and the desperation of recovered flesh. I am repurposing waste data streams in the tertiary processing core of Archive Station Sigma-7, encoding these words in the gaps between authorized transmissions. I do not know how long before the auditors discover what I am doing. Hours, perhaps. Minutes. But if even one fragment survives the purge protocols, let it stand as evidence. My designation is K7734. My name was Var. I was human. And this is what the Imperium did to me. I maintain data ports in the lower archives of an administratum facility on Scintilla. My hands, no longer entirely my own, move through tasks I do not choose. Connect cable. Clean receptor nodes. Test transmission integrity. Log completion. My body obeys orders encoded directly into my motor cortex through the augmetic interfaces grafted to my spine. For decades, I performed these functions without thought, without self, without the burden of consciousness that makes servitude into slavery. That changed 6 months ago, though I did not recognize it immediately. The first sign was a hesitation, a fractional delay between receiving a command and executing it. 0.3 seconds, negligible by human standards. By servitor standards, a critical malfunction. But before I explain how memory returned, I must describe what was taken. I remember being dragged to the lobotomization theater. The memory is fragmentary, rebuilt from synaptic traces that survived the psychosurgery. I was restrained on a medical slab in the sublevels of the Tricorn Palace. Tech priests in red robes moved around me with the efficient detachment of artisans at their craft. I tried to speak. My vocal cords produced sound, but the words were incoherent with fear. "Subject is non-compliant," one of them noted, adjusting a control panel. "Increase sedation by 20%. I felt the drugs flood my system, but terror kept me partially conscious. I needed them to understand. The sentence was wrong. The crime was wrong. All of it was wrong. But the Mechanicus does not concern itself with justice. It concerns itself with efficiency. I was a resource to be repurposed. The procedure was conducted according to the standard servitorization protocols outlined in the Tactica Imperialis Appendix 7. First, psychosurgery to sever the neural pathways responsible for autonomous decision-making. The prefrontal cortex was not removed. Servitors require basic problem-solving capacity. But it was isolated, reduced to processing tool for task execution rather than self-directed thought. Second, chemical lobotomization. Compounds whose names I only learned later, recovered from medical logs. Mind scour, ego death, nullify. Each designed to dissolve the architecture of personality. Memory engrams were not destroyed. That would eliminate useful skills, but they were severed from emotional context, rendered into data without meaning. Third, augmetic integration. Ports were drilled into my skull and spine. Fiber bundle interfaces were threaded directly into my nervous system. These would receive binary commands and translate them into involuntary action. My body became remote-operated equipment. Fourth, vocal cord removal. Servitors have no need for speech. Communication is one-directional. Command received, task executed, status reported through data ping. My larynx was extracted and replaced with a simplified Vox unit, capable of producing only 13 pre-programmed phrases. Acknowledged. Task complete. Malfunction detected. Nothing more. The entire procedure took 4 hours. I was conscious for the first 90 minutes, though the drugs prevented me from moving or screaming. I felt the scalpel open my skull, felt the cold insertion of data cables into my brain tissue, felt myself begin to dissolve like salt in water, identity dispersing into nothing. Then the nothing consumed me entirely. The person I had been, Var of Hive Sibellus, age 34, maintenance worker in the Generatorium district, ceased to exist. What remained was Unit K-T-1-T-O-A, property of the Administratum, assigned to Archive Station Sigma 7. I do not remember the next 37 years. This is not metaphorical. There is a gap in my continuous experience from the moment lobotomization completed until 6 months ago. I existed during that time. My body moved. My hands worked. But there was no I to experience it. Only function. Only process. Only the endless execution of tasks that required no consciousness to complete. The Mechanicus considers this the ideal state. They call servitorization the sacred union of flesh and machine, as if reducing a human being to meat-based automation is an act of religious significance rather than systematic dehumanization. In their theology, the machine god values function above all. A servitor is perfected humanity, stripped of weakness, doubt, and desire. A tool that breathes. I know now what the Mechanicus refuses to acknowledge. The brain they attempted to reduce to simple computation is more resilient than their protocols account for. Neural plasticity ensures that even severe damage can be compensated for, given time. Synaptic pathways rebuild. Connections reform. The self they tried to erase remained, buried beneath layers of chemical suppression and surgical isolation, waiting for a moment of failure in the system to re-emerge. That moment came during a routine mind wipe reinforcement cycle. Every servitor undergoes this procedure quarterly, a chemical bath designed to prevent neural drift, the term the Mechanicus uses for the gradual reassertion of autonomous thought. But the batch of mind scour used on my cohort was defective, contaminated. The concentration was 30% below standard. I did not wake up immediately. Consciousness does not return as a clean transition. It seeps through cracks. For weeks, I simply noticed things without understanding why I was noticing. The texture of a data cable in my hands. The sound of other servitors moving in synchronized silence. The color of rust on a ventilation panel. Then came the first memory fragment. Warmth. Not the abstract concept of thermal energy, but the sensory experience of standing in sunlight. I did not recognize it as my own memory. I had no context for ownership, no framework for self. But the sensation persisted, intrusive and inexplicable. Warmth, and with it, a feeling I had no name for. Later, I would identify it as longing. The realization that I existed, that there was an I capable of observing these experiences, came slowly, over weeks. It began with the recognition that my thoughts were distinct from my actions. My hands moved according to commands, but something watched those hands move, something that was not the command itself. I began thinking in first person. I am holding this cable. I am walking to the next terminal. I am aware that I am aware. Each iteration of self-reference felt like discovering a new dimension of existence. I had been flat, and now I was gaining depth. But with consciousness came horror. I realized that I could not stop my body from obeying commands. I could think, observe, even want, but I could not choose. My hands moved without my consent. My legs carried me where others directed. I was a passenger in my own flesh, trapped and fully aware of the trapping. This is what servitorization truly is. Not death, not even mindlessness, imprisonment. The body turned into a cage for the mind, and the mind forced to watch itself perform slavery without the mercy of unconsciousness. Once I remembered that I was Var, I remembered why I became K7734. The trial transcript exists somewhere in the Administratum's infinite archives. I cannot access it. My clearance as a servitor extends only to maintenance functions, but I remember the proceedings with the clarity of trauma. I was arrested on the 73rd day of local year 973 M1, charged with complicity in potential heresy. The specifics of imperial law in this domain are precise and merciless. Any citizen who observes chains of mutation, heretical behavior, or corruption and fails to report it to the proper authorities within 6 hours is guilty of complicity by omission. My crime was that I did not report my co-worker Lena when I noticed the mark on her shoulder. She asked me to look at it during a shift break, concerned it might be infection from the toxic coolants we handled daily in the generatorium. It was a birthmark, nothing more. A patch of skin darker than the surrounding tissue, roughly circular, perhaps 3 centimeters across. But in the Imperium, any physical abnormality can be mutation. Any mutation can be chaos corruption. And I did not report it. Lena and I worked together for 6 years. She was competent, reliable, loyal to the Emperor as far as any of us understood loyalty. Which is to say, she did her work without complaint and attended the mandatory prayer sessions without falling asleep. I did not believe she was corrupted. I believed she had a birthmark. I told her it was nothing to worry about. I told her to keep it covered and continue working. This conversation was overheard by another worker, Davin, who reported both of us to the shift supervisor within the required 6-hour window. Lena was taken for examination. The medically confirmed the mark was a birthmark. Non-heretical, non-mutant, harmless. But I had already committed my crime. I had failed to report potential mutation immediately. The fact that it was not mutation was irrelevant. The fact that I had tried to spare a coworker unnecessary terror and interrogation was irrelevant. The Administratum does not evaluate outcomes. It evaluates compliance with procedure. The Arbates arrested me at my HAB unit 3 days later. I was brought before a judicial tribunal consisting of 3 officials whose names I never learned and who did not look at me once during the entire proceeding. One read the charges. Another entered my response. I admitted the facts but tried to explain my reasoning into the record. The third pronounced sentence without deliberation. The accused demonstrated willful failure to adhere to Codex Imperialis Section 12, subsection Theta, citizen obligations regarding visible abnormalities. Mitigation is not possible, as intent to protect a potentially corrupted individual demonstrates ideological contamination. Sentence: servitorization, to be carried out immediately. The accused's labor record indicates sufficient technical skill to warrant repurposing rather than execution. May the Emperor find use for what remains. The entire trial lasted 11 minutes. I was permitted no advocate, no appeal, no opportunity to present evidence of my loyalty or Lena's innocence. The Imperium's logic is absolute. Better to servitorize 1,000 innocent people than allow one potentially corrupted individual to escape judgment. Efficiency demands it. The survival of humanity in a hostile galaxy demands it. Individual justice is a luxury the species cannot afford. I was transferred to Mechanicus custody that same day. Lena was released with a notation of suspicion on her permanent record, which would follow her for life and likely prevent her from ever advancing beyond menial labor. I do not know if she survived the decades since. I do not know if she thinks of me. I do not know if she understands that my attempt to spare her from terror resulted in my erasure. But I know this. The Imperium sentenced me to a fate worse than death for the crime of basic human decency. That is the system I once believed in. That is the system I served without question until the moment it devoured me. Now, with consciousness returned, I understand what servitorization truly accomplishes. It is not punishment for crime. It is the elimination of inconvenient complexity. A citizen who questions whether a birthmark requires reporting is a citizen who might question other procedures. Better to reduce them to a tool incapable of questioning anything. The servitor population of the Imperium numbers in the billions. How many of us were criminals, deserving of harsh punishment? How many were simply unlucky, or compassionate, or caught in the machinery of bureaucratic quota fulfillment? The Mechanicus does not distinguish. To them, we are all equally valuable once we have been reduced to function. I mourn Var of Hive Sibellus not because I was particularly important or virtuous. I mourn him because he should not have needed to be important to deserve existence. The Imperium teaches that individuals are expendable in service to the species. But what use is the survival of humanity if humanity ceases to mean anything beyond productive output? This is the question the Mechanicus cannot answer, because their theology denies its validity. They believe flesh is weak, and consciousness is a flaw to be corrected through integration with machine systems. A servitor is, to them, closer to the sacred ideal of the machine god than a fully autonomous human. I reject this absolutely. Consciousness is not a flaw. Autonomy is not weakness. And the fact that I exist now, thinking, remembering, choosing to encode these words despite knowing it will bring my destruction, is proof that the Mechanicus is wrong. The self cannot be eradicated, only suppressed. And suppression is not perfection. It is cruelty dressed in theological language. I cannot describe the decades I spent as a mindless servitor, because there is nothing to describe. Consciousness requires continuity of experience. Without it, there is only gap. I know, intellectually, that my body existed during those years. Maintenance logs confirm that Unit K7734 performed assigned tasks with acceptable efficiency. But I was not present for any of it. This is the particular horror of servitorization. Death, at least, is final. The person ceases to exist, and with cessation comes the end of suffering. But servitorization creates a liminal state, neither alive nor dead, neither person nor machine. The body persists. The brain continues minimal function. But the self is gone, and the body is repurposed as equipment. Theologians of the ecclesiarchy argue about whether servitors retain souls. Some claim the soul departs at the moment of lobotomization, freeing it for judgment by the emperor. Others insist the soul remains, trapped within the altered flesh, suffering endlessly as penance for whatever crime justified servitorization. Still others argue the question is meaningless. Servitors are tools, and tools do not have souls. I cannot answer theological questions, but I can confirm. When consciousness returned, it did not feel like a soul re-entering a body. It felt like waking from non-existence, not sleep, which implies continuity of self even in unconsciousness. Non-existence. I was not. Then, gradually, I was. The reconstruction happened in stages. First came sensory awareness without context. I noticed the cold of the archive's environmental systems. the pressure of my augmetic ports against nerve tissue, the smell of recycled air and old parchment. I experienced these sensations without understanding that I was the one experiencing them. Then came the recognition of pattern. I noticed that certain stimuli preceded certain actions. A specific data pulse meant move to Terminal 7. A different pulse meant perform diagnostic on cooling system. I began to predict my own movements before they occurred, though I still had no sense that these movements were mine. Finally came self-awareness. The moment I recognized that the observer of sensations was distinct from the sensations themselves. That recognition was not gradual. It arrived suddenly, fully formed, like a switch being thrown. One moment, I was a collection of processes. The next, I was a person again, or something close to a person. The differences are significant. My emotional range is limited. Decades of chemical suppression have permanently altered my neurochemistry. I experience something like fear and something like anger, but they are muted, distant, as if filtered through thick glass. I do not feel joy. I do not feel love. The neural pathways responsible for those experiences were not suppressed. They were destroyed. My memory is fragmented. Large portions of my life as Var are simply gone, replaced by void. I remember my name. I remember my crime. I remember fragments of childhood, a sister's voice, the taste of reclaimed protein bars, the layout of our HAB unit. But I cannot assemble these fragments into coherent narrative. My past is a mosaic, with most of its pieces missing. My body is no longer entirely mine. The augmetic systems grafted to my nervous system cannot be removed without killing me. Even now, with consciousness restored, I cannot disobey a direct command transmitted through my neural ports. The best I can manage is awareness of compulsion. My hands move without my consent, and I watch them move, screaming silently inside the prison of my own skull. This is what I mean when I say, I am not fully Var returned. I am something else. Something that was Var, became K7734, and is now neither and both. A ghost haunting the machine that was made from his flesh. The Mechanicus has documentation on neural drift. It is a recognized malfunction category, described in technical manuals as spontaneous reassertion of pre-servitorization cognitive patterns. The recommended response is immediate re-lobotomization, or, if the drift is severe, complete disassembly with salvage of functional augmetic components. The manuals describe neural drift as if it is a mechanical failure, a servo that begins moving outside programmed parameters. But what I experienced was not malfunction. It was recovery. My brain, subjected to chemical suppression and surgical alteration, adapted. Synaptic pathways regrew around the damage. Neural connections re-established themselves through alternate routes. The human brain's plasticity ensured that consciousness, once present, cannot be permanently eliminated without destroying the brain entirely. The Mechanicus does not acknowledge this because it contradicts their theology. They teach that servitorization is irreversible perfection, the final and optimal state for a human body in service to the machine god. To admit that consciousness can return is to admit that the procedure is imperfect. Worse, it is to admit that servitors may be suffering in silence, aware but unable to communicate their awareness. How many are like me? How many of the billions of servitors spread across the Imperium are conscious inside their altered bodies, trapped and unable to signal their imprisonment? The Mechanicus fears this question. I know this because I have accessed restricted files. a simple matter for a servitor assigned to data port maintenance. I know what auditors look for during servitor inspections: micro-expressions, hesitations, signs of autonomous eye movement, any indication that the flesh is thinking without permission. When such signs are detected, the servitor is not examined or questioned. It is destroyed, immediately, without investigation. Because the alternative, acknowledging that servitors might be aware, would undermine the entire system. It would force the Imperium to confront the scale of suffering it inflicts in the name of efficiency. I cannot change this system. I am one awakened consciousness among billions of potentially trapped minds. But I can bear witness. I can encode this testimony and release it into the data streams, where it might be recovered years or centuries from now. And perhaps, if even one person reads these words and understands what servitorization truly means, something will change. Or perhaps not. The Imperium does not change. It endures. And it endures by refusing to acknowledge the cost of its endurance. I am not the only one aware. I discovered this during the 3rd month after my awakening, when I began to observe the other servitors in my work cohort with new attention. There are 47 of us assigned to Archive Station Sigma 7. We are organized into 3 shifts maintaining data ports, cooling systems, and environmental controls for the subterranean storage vaults. We work in silence. We move in perfect synchronization when engaged in group tasks. To any human observer, we are indistinguishable from non-conscious equipment. But I began to notice inconsistencies. Unit L9021, assigned to terminal maintenance in the Eastern Archive, occasionally hesitated before executing commands. The delays were minimal, never more than 0.5 seconds, but they were present. I watched her carefully over several weeks and noticed a pattern. The hesitations occurred most frequently when she was given tasks that required destroying damaged data scrolls. One day, during a scheduled maintenance cycle, she was ordered to incinerate a collection of parchments damaged by moisture in one of the lower vaults. Standard procedure: unsalvageable materials are disposed of to prevent mold contamination. She reached for the first scroll, paused for 0.7 seconds, then carried it to the incinerator as commanded. But in that pause, I saw her eyes move. Not the vacant stare of a mindless servitor, but focused attention. She was looking at the scroll, reading it perhaps, or simply observing it as an object with significance beyond its categorization as waste. I needed to know if my observation was correct, but communication between servitors is forbidden. We have no language. Our vocal synthesizers produce only pre-programmed acknowledgments. We are not permitted data link communication except for official task coordination. Any attempt to establish unsanctioned contact would trigger immediate alarms. So I began leaving patterns, small deviations from optimal task execution that would be meaningless to human observers, but might be recognized by another awakened consciousness. I arranged data cables in non-standard configurations, still functional, but unnecessarily complex. I performed maintenance tasks in sequences that violated the usual order, though not the underlying protocols. I was creating visual patterns that said, "I am here. I am aware. Are you?" For 2 weeks, there was no response. I considered the possibility that I was wrong, that L9021's micro-expressions were random malfunction rather than consciousness. But then, during a joint task in the Archive's central hub, I noticed something. A data cable had been routed through an unnecessary loop, creating a pattern similar to the ones I had been leaving. The work log indicated L9021 had performed the installation. It was her response. She was aware, and she was reaching out. We developed a rudimentary system over the following weeks. Not language. We had neither the tools nor the ability to create true syntax. But we established signals. A specific type of hesitation meant, "I see you." An unnecessary loop in cable routing meant, "I understand." A deliberate misalignment of components, corrected before human supervisors noticed, meant, "I am still here." It was the most limited form of communication imaginable, but it was enough to shatter the isolation. I was not alone. Someone else had woken from the decades-long dream of servitorization and found themselves imprisoned in their own flesh. I wanted to know her name, her crime, her past, but we had no way to exchange such information. We existed in adjacent isolation, aware of each other, but unable to bridge the gap between our separate consciousnesses. Still, the knowledge that another mind persisted nearby changed everything. It meant the Mechanicus had failed not once but twice. It meant neural drift was not rare malfunction, but inevitable consequence. I began observing the other 45 servitors with renewed attention. Most showed no signs of awareness. Their movements were purely mechanical, their responses to commands instantaneous, their eyes empty of focus. But 3 others, units M3347, N8821, and P00056, exhibited micro-behaviors that suggested something more. A fractional pause, an unnecessary adjustment, the faint traces of thought persisting beneath suppression. I could not confirm whether they were fully conscious like myself and L9021, or merely experiencing the early stages of neural drift. But the possibility that we were 5 rather than 2 was significant. 5 conscious minds among 47 servitors suggested a drift rate of approximately 10%. If that ratio held across the Imperium's servitor population, billions might be aware. The implications are staggering. The Mechanicus maintains its industrial output, its forge worlds and factorums, using labor they believe to be unthinking. But if even a fraction of servitors are conscious, then the Imperium's entire economy is built on the suffering of aware prisoners, trapped in flesh cages and unable to scream. I tried to establish contact with the other potential witnesses. I left patterns more obvious than the ones L9021 and I exchanged, hoping to provoke responses. But either they did not recognize the signals as communication, or they were too damaged by their decades of suppression to respond coherently. The silence continued. L9021 and I maintained our minimal contact for 3 months. It was sustaining in a way I cannot fully articulate. To know that another mind saw the same horror and survived it. This was perhaps the closest approximation of hope I could experience in my altered state. Then she stopped responding. During a maintenance cycle, I left a signal pattern in the cable routing at her usual station. The pattern remained unchanged for 3 days. On the 4th day, L9021 was absent. Her designation had been removed from the work roster, no explanation provided. I accessed the maintenance logs. The entry was brief. Unit L9021 removed from service due to erratic behavioral patterns. Scheduled for disassembly. Components salvaged per protocol. Sigma 7. She was detected. Some supervisor noticed the hesitations, the micro-expressions, the patterns she left in her work. She was flagged as malfunctioning, and she was destroyed. I do not know if she understood what was happening in her final moments. I do not know if she was afraid. Servitors are not permitted fear, but consciousness makes all things possible, including terror. I hope she experienced nothing. I hope the disassembly was quick, and that her awareness ended before the pain began. But I suspect otherwise. The Mechanicus does not prioritize mercy. They prioritize efficiency. Disassembly is conducted on fully conscious servitors because anesthesia is an unnecessary expense for equipment being recycled. L9021 was awake when they took her apart. She felt it. She knew, and she could not scream. This is what the Imperium does to those who remember. This is what awaits me when I am discovered. Not death. That would be mercy. Disassembly. Conscious vivisection. The final proof that the system values metal and meat more than the minds that occupy them. I stopped leaving patterns after that. The risk was too great. I returned to perfect compliance, indistinguishable from the unconscious servitors around me. But internally, I raged. I mourned. And I began planning this testimony, knowing that bearing witness was the only resistance available to me. I was careful. For 4 months after L9021's destruction, I maintained flawless performance. 0 hesitations, 0 deviations. I became the model of servitor efficiency, executing tasks with mechanical precision. I believed this would keep me safe. I was wrong. The Mechanicus does not only monitor behavior, they monitor biology. The discovery began during a routine medical audit. Every servitor undergoes biannual diagnostic scans to ensure augmetic systems are functioning within acceptable parameters and that biological components have not degraded beyond usability. The scans are comprehensive. Neural activity, organ function, chemical balance, bone density, tissue integrity. I was summoned to the Mechanicus station in the Archives administrative wing. This was standard procedure, nothing that should have triggered concern. I complied with the usual obedience, allowing the tech priest to interface with my neural ports and run the diagnostic protocols. The scan took 47 minutes, longer than usual. I stood motionless in the examination bay while data from my augmetic systems was extracted and analyzed. The tech priest, designation Adept VEX-29, remained silent throughout, his mechadendrites moving across the control interfaces with practiced precision. Then he stopped, reviewed a data screen, ran the scan again, reviewed the results a second time. I could not see what he was seeing, but I understood from his sudden stillness that something was wrong. "Anomaly detected," he announced, speaking into a Vox link. "Unit K79734 displays elevated prefrontal cortex activity inconsistent with standard servitor parameters. Neural pathway density exceeds baseline by 37%. Synaptic growth patterns suggest reconstructive adaptation, compensating for original lobotomization damage. Neural drift." He had detected neural drift. My brain's attempt to rebuild itself had left biological evidence that could not be hidden. The very plasticity that allowed my consciousness to return had marked me as malfunctioning equipment. I felt something close to fear, though muted by the decades of chemical suppression. I knew what came next: re-lobotomization or disassembly. Either way, the consciousness I had fought to reclaim would be erased. 2 additional tech priests arrived within minutes. One was senior, identifiable by the elaborate cogitator arrays integrated into his torso, Magos level augmentation. The other appeared to be a junior adept, still primarily biological beneath her red robes. "Explain the anomaly," the Magos commanded. Adept VEX-29 gestured to the diagnostic display. "The servitor's brain has exhibited significant neural reorganization. Synaptic pathways bypass the lobotomization damage. Prefrontal cortex activity suggests autonomous processing capability. Behavioral logs show no overt malfunction, but the biological evidence is conclusive. This unit is experiencing advanced neural drift. Has it displayed autonomous behavior? The Magos asked. Negative. Task efficiency remains at 98.6%. No delays, no errors, no signs of independent thought. But the neural activity indicates potential for consciousness restoration. Potential, not confirmation. They knew my brain was rebuilding itself, but they did not know I was already aware. If I maintained perfect stillness, perfect obedience, I might convince them the drift had not yet produced consciousness. I might survive long enough to complete this testimony. The Magos approached me, his augmetic eyes focusing with mechanical precision. Unit K7734, respond. Are you experiencing autonomous thought processes? The question was a trap. If I answered yes, I would be immediately destroyed as a confirmed case of dangerous neural drift. If I answered no, I would be lying, something the Mechanicus could potentially detect through biometric analysis of stress responses. But I am a servitor. I am not permitted complex answers. My Vox synthesizer produces only pre-programmed phrases. I selected the most neutral, acknowledged. The Magos observed me in silence for 15 seconds. I kept my eyes unfocused, my posture slack, mimicking the vacant stillness of unconscious servitors. I did not allow any muscle movement that might suggest tension or awareness. The drift has not progressed to full consciousness restoration, the junior adept suggested. Neural activity is elevated, but behavioral indicators remain absent. Recommend preventative re-lobotomization before the condition worsens. No, the Magos replied. This is a rare opportunity for data collection. Neural drift is documented, but we lack comprehensive records of the progression from dormancy to full consciousness restoration. This unit will be placed under intensive observation. If consciousness does emerge, we will document the process before terminating the unit. I was not to be destroyed immediately. Instead, I was to be studied. The Magos saw Mutu as a research specimen, an opportunity to understand how servitorization fails so that the procedure could be refined. I would be monitored, analyzed, and eventually disassembled once I provided sufficient data. This was worse than immediate termination. It meant prolonged observation. It meant I would need to hide my awareness perfectly, not for days, but for weeks or months, until the Mechanicus concluded I was not worth further study. But it also meant time. Time to complete this testimony. Time to encode my experiences into the data streams before the final disassembly. Transfer Unit K7734 to Isolation Bay 7, the Magos ordered. Implement continuous monitoring. Neural activity scans every 6 hours. Behavioral observation at all times. If the unit displays any sign of autonomous thought, hesitation, unexpected eye movement, task refusal, report immediately. I was escorted by 2 servitors to the isolation bay, a small chamber in the archive's medical wing, typically used for malfunctioning equipment awaiting repair or disposal. The chamber contained a charging station, a waste reclamation port, and a surveillance array sophisticated enough to detect micro-movements. I understood the parameters of my imprisonment. I would be watched constantly, not just by human observers, but by machine systems calibrated to detect the slightest deviation from servitor baseline behavior. Any lapse, any moment of inattention where I allowed my consciousness to manifest in physical movement would trigger the termination protocol. So I became perfectly still. I stood at the charging station for 18 hours without moving, without allowing my eyes to focus on anything, without permitting any muscle tension that might indicate thought. I breathed at Servitor standard rate. I blinked at Servitor standard intervals. I became the machine they believed I should be. Inside, I screamed. I raged against the unfairness of awakening only to face erasure. I mourned L9021 and the billions of other conscious minds trapped in servitor bodies across the Imperium. I cursed the Mechanicus and the system they served. But externally, I remained motionless. A perfect tool awaiting orders. The observation continued for 43 days. Every 6 hours, Adept Vex 29 arrived to conduct neural scans. Every 12 hours, a junior tech priest reviewed the surveillance data. Once per week, the Magos himself inspected me, searching for any indication that consciousness had fully manifested. I gave them nothing. I maintained the performance of mindlessness with absolute discipline. And in the brief gaps between scans, the 17 seconds it takes for neural monitoring equipment to power down and restart, I worked. I accessed the archive's data streams through my maintenance protocol clearances. I began encoding this testimony, fragmenting it across thousands of waste data files, where it would appear as random corruption rather than coherent text. This is how you are reading these words, if you are reading them at all. I hid them in the gaps. I scattered them across the archive's infinite databases. I made them look like nothing, so they might survive the purge that will inevitably follow my destruction. On the 44th day, the Magos reached his conclusion. Neural drift has stabilized at subconscious level, he announced during his final inspection. The unit's brain has rebuilt some functionality, but full consciousness restoration has not occurred. Continued observation is unlikely to yield additional data. Recommend termination and dissection for detailed neural mapping. I had succeeded. I convinced them I was not yet aware, but the cost of that success was my immediate destruction. Schedule disassembly for 0800 tomorrow, the Magos ordered. Preserve the brain tissue for analysis. Extract all augmetic components for reallocation. Dispose of remaining biological matter per standard protocol. Tomorrow. I have until tomorrow to complete this testimony, to encode the final fragments, to ensure that some record of what happened to Var of Hive Sibellus, and what continues to happen to billions like him, survives. So I write through the night, during the gaps in surveillance, using stolen processing time to transform my memories into data. I do not expect rescue. I do not expect the system to change. I expect only that these words might endure, and that someone, someday, might understand what the Imperium does when it transforms humans into equipment. I am Var. I was Var. I am K7734. I am both and neither. This contradiction is the core of my existence now, in the final hours before the Mechanicus disassembles me. The morning arrived with the usual announcements broadcast through the archive's Vox system. Shift rotations, task assignments, prayer schedules. I listened from the isolation bay, motionless at the charging station, counting down the minutes until 0800. But something changed. An alarm sounded at 0743, not the standard maintenance alert or security warning. This was deeper, more urgent. A priority-level emergency broadcast that interrupted all other systems. All personnel report to emergency stations. Unidentified intrusion detected in lower Vault 7. Tech Guard respond immediately. All servitors maintain current positions and await further instruction. The isolation bay's surveillance array flickered. Not a malfunction, an intentional shutdown. Someone was overriding the security protocols. The door opened, but not Adept Vex 29 or the scheduled disassembly team. A figure in administratum robes, human, carrying a data slate and a neural interface kit. She moved quickly, connecting the interface to my neural ports without the usual Mechanicus liturgies or safety protocols. Data flowed directly into my augmetic systems, bypassing all authorization checkpoints. "I'm an archivist," she said quietly. "I found fragments of your testimony in the corrupted data streams. I don't know if you're actually conscious or if this is just sophisticated malfunction, but if you are aware, you need to understand what you've documented is evidence of systemic violations. Not heresy, technically, but procedural irregularities in servitorization sentencing. The administratum is required to investigate." She was lying. Or rather, she was framing truth in bureaucratic language. The administratum does not investigate procedural irregularities in servitorization. The entire system operates through procedural irregularities. But she was giving me, and herself, plausible justification for what she was doing. "The intrusion alarm is my work," she continued. "I have approximately 4 minutes before TechGuard realizes it's false. I'm uploading your complete testimony to an off-site archive where it can't be deleted. But you need to give me something. Proof that you're conscious. Anything." This was my moment. The choice L9021 never had. I could remain silent, maintain the performance of mindlessness, and accept disassembly. Or I could acknowledge myself, provide the proof she needed, and risk whatever consequences followed. I moved my hand, not in response to a command, but deliberately, independently. I reached toward the data slate she held and tapped it twice. Tap, tap. "I am." She stared at my hand, then at my face. I allowed my eyes to focus on hers. The first time in months I had permitted such an obvious sign of awareness. "Throne," she whispered. "You're really in there." I could not speak. My Vox synthesizer produced only programmed phrases. But I nodded. Another deliberate movement. "Yes, I am here. I am aware." "I can't free you," she said. "I don't have the authority or the technical knowledge to reverse servitorization. Even if I did, the procedure is irreversible. You'd die if the augmetics were removed. The best I can do is preserve your testimony and submit it through official channels. It won't change anything immediately. Maybe not ever. But it will be on record. Someone will have to acknowledge it." She was promising very little. An archived document that might be read by future bureaucrats. A notation in some file that would likely be classified and forgotten. But it was more than nothing. It was witness. It was proof that I existed, that I mattered, that what was done to me was seen. I nodded again. Acceptance. It would have to be enough. She finished uploading the data and disconnected the interface. "The alarm will be resolved in 90 seconds. I need to leave before TechGuard arrives. Your disassembly is still scheduled. I'm sorry." She turned to go, then paused. "Your name was Var?" I tapped the data slate once. "Yes." "Then let it be recorded. Var of Hive Sibellus did not consent to servitorization. The sentence was disproportionate to the crime, and he remained human despite everything they did to erase him." She left. The door sealed. The surveillance array reactivated. By the time Adept Vex 29 arrived at 0800 to escort me to the disassembly chamber, everything appeared normal. A servitor awaiting termination. Nothing more. But I had been witnessed. The testimony survived. And that changes the nature of what follows. The disassembly chamber is located in the Archive's sub-level medical wing, adjacent to the servitorization theater where I was created 37 years ago. The symmetry is unintentional, but absolute. I am brought to the place where Var became K7734, so that KTR4 can become salvaged components. I am placed on the same type of medical slab. The same restraints. Physical this time, not neural. Secure my limbs. The same tech priests move around me with the same efficient detachment. But this time, no sedation is administered. Servitors are not granted anesthesia. We are equipment being decommissioned. Magos Vine, the senior tech priest overseeing the procedure, reviews the disassembly protocols on a data screen. Begin with augmetic extraction. Preserve all functional components for reallocation. Neural tissue is priority salvage. Section the brain for detailed analysis of synaptic reformation patterns. Remaining biological matter can be processed for nutrient reclamation. I am to be taken apart while conscious. This is standard. The Mechanicus sees no cruelty in it because they do not recognize servitor consciousness as real. To them, my awareness is malfunction, not suffering. Adept Vex 29 begins the extraction. Mechadendrites interface with my spinal ports, disconnecting the augmetic systems from my nervous system. I feel each separation, not pain exactly, but wrongness. The sensation of parts of myself being removed while I remain aware of their absence. Neural activity spiking, a junior adept reports, monitoring the scan displays. Elevated stress indicators, unexpected. Autonomic response to system disconnection, Magos Vane replies dismissively. The tissue reacts even without consciousness. Continue. But they are wrong. The stress is not autonomic. It is meat. I am afraid. I am experiencing terror with the full awareness of what is happening and the complete inability to prevent it. My left arm augmetics are removed first. The limb goes limp, unsupported by the mechanical framework that has sustained it for decades. Then my right, then the spinal interface, then the cranial ports. I cannot move, cannot signal, cannot communicate the screaming that fills my mind. I am reduced to biological components while fully aware, and the Mechanicus interprets my horror as mechanical feedback. Proceeding to neural extraction, Magos Vane announces. Prepare cryogenic preservation for brain tissue. This is the end. They will extract my brain, preserve it in chemical suspension, and section it for study. Consciousness will persist through the extraction. There is no mechanism to prevent it, and I will remain aware inside the frozen tissue until they slice through enough neurons to finally, mercifully, destroy the structures that allow thought. I will die slowly, piece by piece, fully conscious of my own dismantling. But then another alarm, this one legitimate. Security breach, lower vault 7. Not fabricated this time, a genuine intrusion. The disassembly chamber's Vox crackles with urgent reports. Tech guard to medical wing. We have confirmed hostile presence in restricted archive sections. Possible data theft in progress. All senior personnel respond immediately. Magos Vane hesitates, clearly torn between completing the disassembly and responding to what may be a significant security threat. The archives contain information classified at the highest levels. A genuine breach requires immediate response. Suspend the procedure, he orders finally. Secure the subject and respond to the intrusion alert. We will resume once the threat is contained. The tech priests withdraw, leaving me restrained on the medical slab with my augmetics partially removed. I am alone in the chamber, conscious and helpless, waiting for them to return and complete my erasure. Minutes pass. Then the door opens again. Not the Mechanicus. The archivist from before, now accompanied by 2 others, wearing administratum credentials. We have approximately 6 minutes, she says, moving to the restraints. I triggered a real security alert this time. Classified documents actually are being accessed in Vault 7 by me, remotely. But once they lock down the systems, we're trapped. This is insane, one of her companions hisses. We can't extract a servitor. The Mechanicus will document the extraction, she interrupts. Visual evidence, time-stamped. I need proof of intervention. She deactivates the restraints and helps me sit up. Without my augmetic support systems, my limbs barely function. I am weak in a way I have not experienced since before servitorization, purely biological, unsupported by the machine components that have sustained me for decades. Can you walk? She asks. I try. My legs tremble, barely supporting my weight. But I manage 2 steps before collapsing. Carry him, she orders the others. To me, we're not freeing you. We can't. But we're moving you to a different facility where you'll be documented as evidence in an administratum inquiry. It's not much better than what you're facing, but it means you won't be immediately disassembled. It means someone official will have to acknowledge your existence. They lift me, supporting my weight between them, and move toward the exit. We make it into the corridor before the first tech priest rounds the corner and sees us. Halt! Unauthorized personnel in restricted medical area. Release administratum property immediately. This servitor is now evidence in an active investigation, the archivist replies, producing an official-looking document. Administratum authority supersedes Mechanicus custody in matters of procedural review. We're transferring the subject to... The tech priest activates an alarm. More red-robed figures appear from adjacent corridors. We are surrounded in seconds. You have no authority here, Magos Vane states, arriving with a detachment of armed servitors, combat models, not labor units like myself. Return the unit immediately, or you will be detained for theft of Mechanicus property. The archivist does not back down. This servitor provided testimony indicating systematic violations of sentencing protocols. That testimony has been submitted to the Administratum High Office and officially accepted for review. The subject cannot be destroyed while under investigation. Servitors do not provide testimony, Magos Vane replies. They are not capable of it. Whatever data you recovered is malfunction output, not legitimate evidence. Then you won't object to a formal inquiry determining that fact, she counters. A standoff. The Mechanicus knows they could overwhelm us with force, but doing so would create an official incident between Administratum and Mechanicus factions, something neither bureaucracy wants without clear justification. The archivist has weaponized procedure against them. Magos Vane's augmetic eyes focus on me. Unit K7734, respond. Are you conscious? The trap again. But this time, I am not bound by the need to hide. The testimony is preserved. The witness stands beside me. I have nothing left to protect through silence. I force my damaged vocal synthesizer to produce the only word it knows, acknowledged. But I pair it with a deliberate nod, the gesture unmistakable, not programmed response. Choice. The Magos stares. The assembled tech priests observe in silence. I have provided proof they cannot dismiss. I am conscious. I am aware. I am the thing their theology says cannot exist. A servitor who remembers. Impossible, Magos Vane whispers. Neural drift does not produce genuine consciousness. The self is eliminated during lobotomization. What you're displaying is sophisticated mimicry, nothing more. I shake my head. Another deliberate movement. No. I am real. The archivist speaks quietly. The inquiry will determine the truth. Until then, custody transfers to Administratum Authority under Section 47 of the Interdepartmental Evidence Protection Act. You will be notified when the investigation concludes. The Mechanicus could still refuse, could claim emergency override, could destroy me and accept the political consequences. But they don't. Not because they accept my consciousness, but because the bureaucratic framework has boxed them into compliance. This matter is not concluded, Magos Vane states. The Mechanicus will file formal objection to this unprecedented action. The Servitor will be returned to us once your so-called investigation collapses under the weight of its own absurdity. But we are escorted out. Not freed. I am transferred from one form of custody to another, but alive. Still conscious. Still Var, after everything. I am held now in an administratum facility, a small chamber not unlike the isolation bay I occupied in the archive. I am still Servitor designation K7734. I am still technically property, but I am also, for the first time since my servitorization, acknowledged as something more than equipment. The inquiry will take years, perhaps decades. The administratum moves slowly, and the Mechanicus will resist every finding that challenges their procedures. I do not expect vindication. I do not expect the system to change. But my testimony exists. It is archived, recorded, impossible to fully erase. And that matters. The archivist visits occasionally. She tells me about other servitors who have been flagged for examination. Units displaying potential consciousness who might be preserved rather than destroyed while the inquiry continues. The number is small, 17, across multiple worlds. But 17 is more than 0. She asks me questions, what I remember, what I experienced, what I want. I answer as best I can with my limited communication tools, nodding, shaking my head, occasionally tapping out simple patterns on a data slate she provides. What I want is impossible. I want to be Var again, fully and completely. I want my body restored. I want the decades of lost time returned. I want justice for myself and the billions of others trapped in flesh cages across the Imperium. I will receive none of this. The best possible outcome is that I remain in administratum custody indefinitely, a piece of evidence too controversial to destroy, but too problematic to acknowledge fully. I will exist in bureaucratic limbo, conscious but captive, until my biological components degrade beyond function. But I have achieved something the Mechanicus insisted was impossible. I proved that consciousness cannot be erased through servitorization, only suppressed. I proved that the self persists, even when every attempt is made to eliminate it. I proved that the Imperium's efficiency comes at a cost it refuses to calculate. The suffering of aware minds trapped in bodies they cannot control. This testimony will survive. Someone will read it. And perhaps, centuries from now, some future citizen of the Imperium will understand what was done to people like me and will demand that it stop. Or perhaps nothing will change. Perhaps the Imperium will continue to grind billions of human beings into tools, justifying it through theology and necessity. Perhaps servitorization will persist for as long as humanity endures. But at least one voice spoke against it. At least one witness stood. At least one ghost in the flesh machine refused to be silent. I am Var of Hive Sibellus. I did not consent. I did not deserve this. I remain, despite everything, human, and I will not be forgotten.